On this episode of Rock School Proprietor Podcast, Mandy and I answer another listener question centered around how to get better results from your groups and your instructors when your studio has a rock band program. Stay tuned. Welcome to Rock School Proprietor Podcast. I'm John Kazicki.
And I'm Mandy York.
We got another listener question, Mandy.
Yeah, another Q&A episode. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I suspect this was maybe inspired by our behavior management in group classes episode, which I believe is episode 28. We got a message from Steve. Do you want to read what we got from Steve?
Yeah, sure. Steve reached out. He asks, have you ever had a band where you felt like if the teacher couldn't pull it together, that it would be in danger of turning into a train wreck? This particular teacher, Steve's teacher, does well with good student bands that are mature and responsible and learn all the music and practice hard. He's a great private lesson teacher. He is super fun, but struggles with structure and keeping things from devolving, into chaos when everyone starts goofing off, playing riffs that they aren't working on, etc. He's struggling currently with one of his bands. These are 9 to 12-year-olds who aren't mature. Steve sat in and helped last week, and it wasn't good. He's worried, and he really doesn't want to have to take over and teach the group himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That sounds like, well, one, I think this is maybe more directed toward me with the kind of the rock school angle.
Oh, yeah.
And I can help, I think. But it does sound really typical of some of the issues that I've seen in my school with that age range of kids.
9 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say this is something that many studio owners see. So we talked with Steve and found out some more details about what's going on here. He currently has 3 band instructors, including himself, at his studio. He has rehearsal rules posted. Be respectful, be prepared, don't play when you aren't supposed to. Steve plans to lead the rehearsal next week so that the teacher can observe. And he has given the instructor some notes and points to focus on to hopefully help improve rehearsals.
Yes, I've got thoughts.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts upon reading this? Because I know I'm going to kind of get long-winded here.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, reading this, I did think yeah, sure, this is typical. Not something exactly the kind of situation I see in my studio. But I think we all, it's good. We got to keep an eye on our teachers. And if they're not teaching at a standard that we hold them to, then the worry is that students aren't going to re-enroll. Right.
Right. There's that fear that maybe parents will kind of start saying, what's going on in there?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. I would say in my studio, there's some comparison going on, right? If you're in, Miss Susie's class versus Mrs. Sally's class, you want the experience to be kind of equal across different teachers.
Yeah.
Right. Not students on Mondays are getting a better experience than students on Tuesdays, right?
That's consistency in the service that you provide, right? Quality control. Yeah. The standards that you hold and expect throughout your studio and people come to know, so that there isn't this weird imbalance of this instructor is great, but you don't want that instructor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want that at your studio.
Right.
And so reading this, I'm kind of thinking, if it were me, I need to be training this teacher more. I need to work more on training them in this case, classroom management, right?
Yes. I agree. I definitely see 2 things going on here. One is the obvious. It's the behavior management in the groups. And we did that entire episode, so I don't know if we should necessarily rehash the whole behavior management, but that definitely has to happen like right away to kind of reel everyone back in and get them productive again, so it's not quite as chaotic. And to Steve's credit, I mean, there's some things in here that I do at Michigan Rock School. Also, let's see, rehearsal rules posted in the rehearsal room. We have that, right? And they're very much the same, worded a little bit differently, but it's essentially the same thing. Show up prepared. You don't play when the band coach is talking. You don't just like randomly play whenever. I've done something similar where if we have a newer band instructor or there's a band instructor that's maybe struggling with something, I'll jump in and observe. I'll jump in and maybe lead briefly. So all these things I think that he's already doing are positives so that they can address that behavior issue. But I agree with you, Mandy, that training and yeah, I think there's a lot to unpackage there. And that's what I want to get into. So what I also learned from Steve is, I mean, he mentioned he's got 3 band coaches, right?
Right.
He's coaching himself. He's the owner of the studio. He's coaching most of these bands himself. He's got these 2 other instructors. I think he mentioned one of them, not the one that's having the issue. One of them's just started.
Okay.
Just started with one band. So I remember when I was at that stage where I was coaching all the bands, and I definitely had my way of doing things, and over time figured out like what works and what doesn't work. But then I also wanted to be able to expand and allow my other instructors to be able to coach bands and not have to coach all the bands myself, and I think that's valuable too, because other instructors are going to do things their own way and in certain respects better than I could do, right? Case in point, just last week, had a new band instructor that I've been sitting in with, and the group was a little crazy, and I kind of lost it for a second, and I was like, you guys got to stop. You got to stop playing. And then I was like, all right, I got to leave the room for a second. I left the room. New band instructor did great. I didn't have to go back in there. He reeled them back in, and like they are responding to his style now. They didn't respond well to my style. So case in point, I think it's good to have these other instructors and these other band coaches. Now, all that said, in that situation, when I was where Steve was, the first thing I thought was like, okay, I am just going to literally write down everything that I do in these band rehearsals. Like to the T, details. Here's what I do. I start with this, and then I do this, and this is how I mix, and then this is I do this. It was a really, really long document. And I think looking at it now, there's no way anyone will be able to follow that to a T. So let me ask you this, Mandy, because you've had training with Music Together. You've put your own instructors through training with Music Together. Obviously, you've got your own style of doing things in your studio, but how much of that training that they get from Music Together and you got from Music Together contributes to like an overall smooth experience? And then you're kind of putting the icing on the cake or modifying for your specific studio. Is that the case?
Right. Yeah, I would say so. That's how it kind of works in my world here. The Music Together training is really thorough. Lots of information about philosophy, why we do what we do, how we do it. And I think, like Steve has pointed out, in his action items here with his instructor, observation is important. observation is a component of the music together training.
Mm-hmm.
So new teachers in training will observe classes, and then they come to me and they start observing and co-teaching.
Okay.
I think that's a really important part of the training experience, and they need to be in my studio with my families and seeing my style of how we do things.
Yeah.
Before they go out on their own. Your long document, everything you're doing, A to Z and everything in between. I observe my teachers, and it's great when you can give them real life examples. Take notes while you're observing, and then in your meeting afterwards, where you're not giving them every single point, but you're saying, I noticed this happened, right? Do you remember when this happened during class?
Mm-hmm.
This is how I would have handled it, right?
Yeah.
Or, if you had done this maybe before that song, you may have avoided that.
Right.
Right. Just those kind of things. Almost in real time, you're giving them this feedback right after the class is over.
Mm-hmm.
So observing and feedback, I think, are really great, but maybe in a different way than what you kind of had initially.
Well, yeah. And I'm going to get into what, because I don't advocate for that.
Right.
I've got a different strategy. But to kind of piggyback on what you were just saying, I do something similar. Like when I'm observing a band coach, I'll take notes right on my phone so that I can share it later.
Yep.
And I look for the positives. Oh,
yeah.
When you did this, you got this response from the group. Do more of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that way they're getting the feedback about what they're doing that is positive.
Mm-hmm.
And then also suggestions for maybe try this if you see they're struggling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you said, I learn a lot from my teachers too.
Mm-hmm.
It's great, and it's really valuable to point those things out to them.
Okay. Now on training processes, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one more question for you in your situation, and then I've got kind of some suggestions for Steve. When you do the training with music together, is it outlines? Is it documents? Is it videos? Just curious.
Yeah, well, everything has moved online. Once upon a time, it was an in-person training. Everything's online, live, like Zoom calls.
Yeah.
There are handbooks, right? Because you're learning about early childhood development research. Yeah. So there's that component of it. And then you're learning, what lesson plan structures are like, and all of those things. And then there's like an asynchronous piece to the training where you're watching videos of classes.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah, I like the word handbook, and in fact, that's what I call my document now in my studio is the band coach handbook.
Yeah, for sure.
So I definitely would suggest for Steve, again, because he also said he doesn't want to do it himself. He's in a situation where he's coaching bands, he's teaching private lessons, he's running the business, empowering his instructors to be able to do these things also is just going to make it better for everyone. But they do need like some guidelines to work within so that they have an understanding of what is expected, what their goals might be, what they're supposed to be executing. So then they do have the freedom to kind of put their own spin on it and have fun. Because again, in Steve's message, he said this instructor is, what did he say? He said super fun, right? So he's a great private lesson instructor. He's super fun, probably just gets in there and kind of is having a hard time keeping things structured. And I don't know if you know this, Mandy. I'm sure you do at this point from hanging out here at the Rock School and with me. Rock musicians like to improvise in all aspects of life. Okay.
No kidding.
Yeah, they don't necessarily like to plan. They don't necessarily like to, write out a lesson plan. They just like to get in there and wing it. which can be good. But when you're dealing with, I think, this age group, 9 to 12-year-olds, if you're winging it,
they're
then
gonna walk up to you.
they think they're okay to wing it too.
Yeah.
And when everyone's just winging it, I think that's probably what's going on here. Okay. So now my notes about what maybe Steve can do to set up some sort of handbook. And then the handbook can be, again, the guides and the expectations. He can use that to adapt any sort of training or figure out, like, do they need to observe first, or do they need to look through the handbook first? And I've found, even with some of my instructors, like, if they're not seeing some aspects of our program, they have no idea it exists, right? So oftentimes I need to reference back to the handbook. Oh yeah, just check out this part. It's in the handbook. And so that's where the answer is. So number one, I think maybe Steve should put expectations for each group and the number of songs that they are trying to perform, right? So however long that session is, or semester, or whatever they're calling it, if it's 4 months, how many songs are the bands supposed to be preparing for their performance in those 4 months? And this might even vary based on age and skill level, right?
Yep.
Those 9-year-olds is even on our best days, when we're able to rally them and get them focused, might not be able to still play 8 songs in a performance. Maybe set the expectation more at like 3 or 4. It really depends. That's another thing, the rough timeline to follow from the first rehearsal to the concert. Now, again, you've got this planned out. Now, you don't have a concert, right? But you've got a timeline for your studio.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. We have a certain number of weeks, a certain number of songs in our curriculum. And yeah, I make sure I cover them a certain number of times.
Right. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super structured. But if we are starting rehearsals on this date and we are having the concert on this date, well, then you have a number of weeks. So it becomes kind of a math problem, right? You say, how many rehearsals? Divide that by the number of songs. And then that gives you an idea of how long you should be spending for each one of those songs, right? Not hard.
No.
Right? You got 4 months, you go for 4 songs, roughly 1 song per month.
Yes.
Simple. Now, this is the next one I've got on my list, is communication. This is a hard one because, generally speaking, in these situations, and I can speak for my studio at least, what we're doing is, in these band rehearsals, we're not necessarily teaching the kids the songs. I mean, sometimes we have to teach some aspects of it. Sometimes we have to teach parts. But the expectation is the band rehearsals are for working on the songs, rehearsing the songs. They should be learning the songs in their private lessons and at home. So if a band coach is observing how the group is working in rehearsals, how does that band coach then communicate to all the private lesson instructors what the progress is? What, if you got 5 kids in the group, 6 kids in the group, what is each one of those kids supposed to be working on from week to week to make sure that they are prepared for the next week? If there are problems coming up with a specific band member, how do you communicate that issue to the private instructor so that they can focus on that in the private lessons? Right?
Yeah.
Another thing that you can do is, when things do kind of run south and get a little crazy, we've done this where the band instructor or the band coach will reach out to the private instructors, and we call it giving them the talk. Hey,
all right.
yeah. So that then the private instructors, in the private lessons, so it's a different dynamic.
Yes.
Right. So the private instructor can sit there with the single student and say, hey, heard things are getting a little crazy in band rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on there? And generally speaking, I think these students kind of look up to the private instructor.
Right.
So if the private instructor is giving them the talk, hey, you can have fun in band rehearsal, but you also got to make sure that you guys are getting stuff done, because you don't want to go into that performance and just be completely unprepared.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's really smart. I mean, in my experience, students have a great, positive relationship with their private teachers,
mm-hmm.
and to have that conversation one-on-one and, like you said, different dynamic, different setting.
Right.
That's very smart.
But yeah, there has to be a system in place, or at least a procedure in place for that regular communication, because you don't want to wait until it's bad.
Yeah.
Right. You want to get into that groove where the private instructors know, okay, this is what they're working on in band.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is an issue, there's like, and it could go the other way too. The private instructor could need clarification on what's happening in band rehearsal. Okay, I know they're working on this song. Who's playing the solo? Who's playing this part? Are there any harmonies? All that stuff.
Yeah.
So communication amongst like the instructors becomes really important. Could maybe consider guidelines for what songs would be best for a particular skill level. That might be some information you want to put in a handbook.
Yeah.
So that the band instructors don't get in a situation where maybe their group is at one skill level, but they chose a song that's like a couple levels up.
Right. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. And maybe even, I don't know what you do, but if this is a new coach, having them submit the song to you at a time, right?
Yeah. Another possible thing to consider in that situation, maybe you've got a band coach who is a drummer,
mm-hmm.
and knows a little bit about the other instruments, but drums are his primary instrument. Is he going to be able to assess a song from a guitar player's perspective as doable for the level of the kids in the group, right? Or vice versa. So, having some sort of guidelines and understanding there, or suggestions. Now, I kind of alluded to this or mentioned this at the beginning, but what are the expectations of the band instructors regarding prep? Right? Again, as I said, these rock guys just kind of like to wing it.
Yeah.
And that's, if you've got a kind of a goal-oriented program where you've got to get results, there might be some requirements for prep, whatever that is. Do they need to provide charts? Do they need to provide lyrics? But I think that should be clearly documented and clearly explained so that the band coaches know, like, oh, I've got to do this for every rehearsal.
Yeah. Yep. Smart.
Provide tactics and strategies for running an effective rehearsal. Now, this goes back to a little bit about behavior management, but we did talk about with that behavior management and the episode we did on that, having a routine in band rehearsals so that everyone knows what to expect. What are the goals for each rehearsal? And in these band situations, it also could include, like, how should you mix the group so everyone can hear properly? What are the volume levels that you want to maintain so that it's not too out of control? Watch out for volume wars where one kid turns up their amp And then the next kid turns up their amp, and then all of a sudden you're like, what's going on? Because they can be quick. And it's kind of funny, but like when you think about a band rehearsal from a kid's perspective, when they're home practicing or when they're in a private lesson even practicing, they hear their instrument more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So when they go into a band rehearsal, it's going to sound different to them. And so their natural instinct is going to be like, oh, I can't hear myself. I need to be louder.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the right mix for the entire group, right? Everyone needs to hear everything well.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe provide some info in the handbook about mix and volume. And I'm big on with my groups, making sure they know how to set up, making sure they know how to clean up, so that they're take care of the room and we're ready for the next group.
Yeah.
Let's see. What else do I got here? Now, when the behavior issues happen, or if they happen, what procedures or protocols do you have in place so that these band coaches know what they can do, what they shouldn't do, so they don't feel lost?
Yeah.
Because again, maybe Steve's band coach is just like, yeah, they're out of control. I don't know what to do here. So strategies that the band instructors can employ. Again, we talked about some of those on our behavior management in groups episode. How to get support if he needs it. If he's in the middle of a band rehearsal and, kid's especially wild and, or something, maybe like an amp breaks or something, like, what do you do? But also, what's that procedure for contacting parents? Or again, contacting the other instructors to get involved. Who's responsible for contacting the parents if they have to do that? Is it an email? Is it a phone call? Like, what's the rough plan there?
Yeah.
Because I think that can vary depending on how you have your studio set up.
Yeah. And who makes the communication with the parents too.
Exactly. And does Steve in this situation feel comfortable with his band coaches reaching out directly to the parents about this?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe so.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also going to want to make sure, if he does, that they're saying the right thing.
Yes.
Not like, yeah, your kid was really bad in rehearsal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you tell him not to be bad?
Yes.
And then the parent's like, what? So, that, like, think about who's responsible for contacting the parent and like how to be tactful.
That goes back to consistency and how you're being represented.
Exactly. And then once this whole handbook is sort of established, what kind of training does Steve want to make sure that his band instructors have so that he feels good about them running the band rehearsals, but also they feel prepared and they feel like they do have a plan and they're not just winging it. Yeah. So that's my really long-winded suggestion for Steve.
It's a big job. It's a big job preparing these teachers.
Yeah.
But it does come down to us as studio owners to make sure they are prepared.
Well, yeah. And this stuff doesn't happen overnight.
No.
I mean, I just have the benefit of having like over 10 years of kind of experiencing all this stuff and saying like, oh yeah, this should go in the handbook.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, we should do, like, we used to do this, but we've got to do this now. So, yeah,
that's good to know too. It's a living document.
Yeah.
Keep adding things to this.
Yes. And again, I'm going to mention this because one of Steve's goals is to not have to jump in and take over. Mm-hmm. So currently everything's in his head.
Mm-hmm.
He goes in there and runs a band rehearsal, and I don't know how much experience he has, but he's got it down. He's done this before. He knows how to interact with the kids to get what he wants out of them, he doesn't necessarily have to think about it. It's almost second nature, right? And these band instructors will get there, but he just needs to figure out, how can I get some of this stuff out of my head? And because he probably did the same thing that they're doing. He probably did the same thing that I did, which is trial and error. You figure it out as you go along. So I think by documenting all these things and setting up a process, he'll be able to help his current band instructors in dealing with all this stuff, but also then he's got a plan for any other band instructors.
Yeah.
So maybe a year from now, this current band instructor is, maybe he's doing great and he's got 5 bands he's working with and he can't take on any more.
Mm-hmm.
What's Steve to do then, right? So success means, okay, now I got to have more people to do this.
Yes.
So better to do it now.
Yeah. And you don't have to recreate the wheel later on when you're hiring more.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that is what it comes down to. We're trying to hire, competent, exciting, passionate teachers that we can rely on so that we don't have to step in.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So those are the 2 big things. Definitely got to deal with the behavior first, but also to support his team, set up some expectations and what he wants to see as the end result, so that these instructors understand, okay, these are my guidelines. Now I'm going to work within them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I like it.
All right. Well, so with that, Steve, good luck. You can do it.
Yeah. And I, again, go back to episode 28.
Yep.
The classroom management. I think it goes along with this conversation really well.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Mandy. We'll see you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, John.
A quick note of thanks to Steve for reaching out and sharing his problem. We hope that our discussion helped. If you have a challenge in your studio or a topic suggestion, we would love to hear from you. You can contact us at info@rockschoolproprietor.com. You can find show notes and transcripts for this and all episodes at rockschoolproprietor.com. I'm at rock.school.proprietor on Instagram if you'd like to connect with me there. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky as John Kazicki. If you enjoyed this show and gained insight from our conversation, then we count that as a win. All we ask in return is that you pay it forward, and please share the show with someone you think needs to hear it.